Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. After hearing some similar stories on a few forums that I follow, I felt compelled to share an experience that I had as a child. This happened when I went to my friend Brody's birthday party around the age of 11. Brody and I were pretty decent friends at that time. We hung out after school at each other's houses before, but it was usually at mine. That was typically both of our preferences, thanks to his older brother. Brody had a brother that I'll call Chad that was around 16 at the time of this event. Chad was a complete ass. He bullied not only Brody, but any of his friends that he had over, including me. He would barge into his room when we were in there, make remarks about us, throw things at us, and then leave. He even on occasion would try to do things physically to us, like if we were walking by. Like he would stick his leg out to trip us, smack us in the back of our head, or push our head down on the table as he walked by. It didn't matter to him as long as he had some way to bully us. And if he wasn't afraid to do it to me, I'm sure he treated Brody's other friends the same way. The only time that he didn't really do this was when his mom was around. She wouldn't tolerate it and would immediately stop him, yell at him, and whatever she had to do to make him stop. And needless to say, when she was home, I preferred to be in the same room as her. For the party, Brody's mom was renting out the local community center to have the party, which meant more people and more opportunities to get lost in the crowd of people. There were probably about 20 kids or so that showed up, and most parents stayed around too. My parents had dropped me off and left, and after a few hours and all the games being played and cake being eaten, we started coming up with our own games to play. One of those was a version of tag where one person is it, but if they start chasing you, you have to call out someone else's name so they chase them instead. So as we started playing this, who else walks in but Chad and two of his friends? I know, I was pretty disappointed in this, but the fact that a few of our mutual friends had the same reaction told me everything that I needed to know. He came over to us, grabbed Brody by the hand, and told him happy birthday. Then he asked what we were playing. When we told him, he said he wanted to play too. My fear was that he was going to ask to be it, and one of us was going to get seriously hurt. I was half right. Surprisingly, he didn't ask to be it, but he and his friends got in the circle with us, and we all began. Our friend that was it started chasing someone else, and as my attention is on the friend being chased, I failed to notice Chad approach me until I had the wind knocked out of me. I fell to the ground, trying to figure out what happened, when I suddenly felt a bunch of pressure on my back. Once I can finally breathe again, I realized that the pressure was someone on my back, like sitting on me or holding me down. Chad then got on his knees, with his head on the floor looking at me with an ugly and creepy grin. I tried fighting to get up, but the one on my back had a hold of my arm and was twisting it back. I was in excruciating pain from my arm and to my face and my stomach, and I was already having trouble breathing. And just when I think I'm probably just going to get beat up, I see Chad bring a little pocket knife up to my face, and he asked me if I wanted a party favor. I started screaming, then I heard other kids screaming and crying. At the same time, Brody was letting out these horrible cries for help, but I didn't know what to do. I could tell he was scared, and hell, I was scared too. We were only 10 and 11 years old. We were not a threat to 3 16-year-olds. Thankfully, after what felt like an eternity, I heard Brody's mom yelling for Chad to get off of me. I could see his face instantly change. He tried to scramble to his feet, all the while hiding the knife. However, he didn't do a very good job, because the way he stood up and slid his hand back, he still ended up cutting part of my neck and chin. And once he was up, I got to my feet as well, holding my face from the pain. His mom yelled at him and made him and his friends leave immediately, which they did. She then rushed me to the restroom to help clean up my face, but I could tell by the look on her face that it wasn't good. She kept apologizing to me and hugging me with tears in her eyes. I was only 11, but man, I felt so sorry for her. She was always such a kind lady, and Brody was always chill too. I never understood why or how Chad turned out the way he did. And once we finished in the restroom, she brought me back out to the others and asked me to stay by her so she could call my parents. They came and picked me up shortly after and then took me to the hospital. I had to get 8 stitches. That night was pretty crappy after that. My mom was pissed about the whole thing, as I remember her blaming Brody's mom for not paying attention, but she wasn't even at the party. I tried to tell her that he wasn't at the party at the start and he just showed up, so I don't think he was supposed to be there, but it didn't matter to her. She thought the right thing to do was to press charges against Chad. Thankfully, that didn't really go anywhere, and his mom settled it by agreeing to pay the hospital bills. I may have been a kid at that time, but as an adult now, I don't really feel like that was the best course of action. But I also don't really talk to my mom anymore. That may be related, who knows. Unfortunately, this definitely strained the friendship between Brody and I. I wasn't allowed to be over there anymore, and anytime I asked if he could come over, there was always a reason why he couldn't. Because of this, we hung out at school, but that was it, and we slowly drifted apart until we eventually moved on and I completely lost touch with him. I really feel bad for Brody because I'm afraid I probably wasn't the only friend he lost because of his brother. Chad, just for some reason, was evil and still have no idea why. All I know is that I have a permanent scar on my chin and large gatherings still kind of scare me. But I hope Brody and his mom are doing okay. And I hope Chad got whatever kind of help he needed. And I hope that I never meet him again. This isn't really creepy, but it was scary for sure. I know I am not the parent in this situation, but rather the kid. This was, who knows, years ago. I was young, maybe like 7 or 8, and I was with my 2 other siblings, my little brother and older sister. We were all 3 years apart. Anyways, we were all in the car waiting for our mom, who had gone inside a Pizza Delight to pick up our food, which she had pre-ordered beforehand. This was in Bayers Lake, I think. We were only alone in there for a minute, and I was tired, so I was half asleep against the window. I was abruptly woken up to aggressive and loud banging on our car window. My sister, maybe 10 at that time, was sitting shotgun. I was in the back seat diagonal from her, and my little brother, probably 4, was beside me. We all immediately looked to where the sound came from and saw a 40 to 50-year-old looking lady. I don't remember much about her, and it was late out, but her hair was kind of frizzy, thin, and crazy looking. It was silvery blonde, and she had a receding hairline and was sweating profusely on her forehead. She looked a little on the heavy side, and her face was practically pressed up against the glass, and she had an intense, crazy look. She held her phone up against the window, my sister's window, with a white emergency dial screen up, and then she yelled something at us. I can't remember what it was, and my mom was literally walking back to the car when this happened, and she was like, "What the hell?" So she immediately gets into the car, and the woman runs around to her door and then grabs it, yelling at her how she's a terrible person for leaving her kids alone in a car and that she was going to call CPS. Our mom explains to her that she was only gone for 5 minutes max, and that she had a 10-year-old in the car with a phone, and that the car was locked, and that she could see the car from where she was in the restaurant. But the lady kept screaming at my mom though, and then she grabs my mom's wrist. So, my mom, who is in the military, immediately rips her hand off her wrist and then slams her door shut, rolls down the window to give her the bird, and then books it. The woman was screaming the whole time and looked genuinely insane and terrifying. Anyways, we later dubbed her Pizza Karen around 2020 when we were reminiscing about the event, and we laugh about it now. But yeah, that's my story. A few years ago, I don't remember exactly when, my husband and I were talking about random things, and I remember that it was mentioned that I had never actually been camping. Like, I had camped in my own backyard as a kid, but I had never had an actual camping trip. This was apparently the wrong thing to have mentioned to him, because within the week, we were making plans. Or more so, he was making plans to have a camping trip within the month. We went all out on it too. He found a nearby campground that wasn't expensive. He bought all the equipment, and he got everything ready to go in what felt like a couple of days. So the day came for us to get on the road and get to the campground. We packed up all our clothes and daily items, got the stuff in the car, and then headed out. I admit, I have never been much of a nature lover. As a kid, I was more into staying inside and playing with my Nintendo than going out on a hiking or swimming or whatever. Yeah, I know that sounds like a boring childhood, but it was mine and it was what I liked. So, needless to say, when we got to the actual campground and it was nothing but empty space and trees, I was a bit enamored. It was gorgeous. He had found a spot that was near a small waterfall that was over a small pool of water. On top of that, it was pretty isolated, in that there were no campers anywhere near our spot. Once we got our tent set up and were confident that we were good to go, I was super excited and I was eager to take a hike around the area. I had brought my digital camera and I wanted to get some pictures of anything and everything that we could, and I absolutely did. We walked around and I got pictures of some wildflowers, I got a few shots of birds, and even got a picture of a deer. As we were hiking, we ended up in a small section of trees that looked like it had been recently cleared out, like someone had been staying there in a tent or something and had recently left. As we approached the cleared out section, the smell of something dead hit me, and hard. It didn't take long to figure out where the smell was coming from. Nearby, we found the carcass of a deer that looked like it had been killed, bled, and then partially eaten, but then left to rot. It made me a bit sick, but my husband looked pretty angry and mentioned that it's actually illegal to leave your kills like that and that we should go back to our spot and then report it to the game warden. When we got back, I let him do all that since I had no idea about any of it. I hopped into the tent and I started going through all my pictures that I have taken. I was actually super happy with how things were going, well, minus the dead animal. And after he had gotten done talking to the game warden, he mentioned that we should consider turning in since it was getting late, and I agreed with him. We stayed up for a little while and just kind of enjoyed each other's company. And after a couple of hours, I started dozing off, so he zipped up the tent and we decided to sleep for the night. Then, after a few hours, I was awoken by the strangest thing. Rain hitting my face. At first, I didn't think anything of it. We were out in the woods and sleeping in a tent after all. But then it hit me. Yes, we were in a tent, but the tent was sealed and there shouldn't be any water coming in at all. My eyes shot open and I immediately freaked out. The door to our tent was completely unzipped and open. I shook my husband awake and I told him that the tent door was open. At first, he thought that we must have left it open. Then I explained to him that I hadn't left the tent since we went to sleep, and he hadn't either. Once he sat up and realized what I was saying, he agreed that it was weird. He stepped out of the tent with our camping flashlight and then looked around in the woods for anything, but then came back in and told me that there was no one out there. We both kind of just accepted it for what it was, and we confirmed that nothing was missing, so it was just a weird situation. But it got weirder. In the morning, after we were fully awake and ate breakfast, I decided that I wanted to show him some of the pictures that I had taken the day before on our hike. I turned on my camera and I went to the pictures, which immediately takes you to the last picture that was taken. There, on the screen, was a picture of myself and my husband sleeping in the tent. The timestamp was around 2 a.m. on the night before, which seriously scared the hell out of me. I immediately showed him the picture and I mentioned the whole tent door being open thing. I was panicking. He, of course, told me to calm down, but then I told him that whoever it was that had opened our tent was able to reach past me, grab my camera, and then take a picture of us without me noticing, because my camera was right by my head. I don't think the weight of what could have happened really hit him, but it was definitely apparent to me. If this person was any more of a psycho, I likely would have been dead. At my request, we ended up packing all of our stuff and heading out to the office for the campgrounds to file a report. They took the info and then probably did nothing with it, but at least they were aware of the situation. This was the one and only time that I have ever been camping, and I don't think I will ever feel comfortable doing it again, mostly because I don't know if this person had malicious intent or if this was just some dumb prank or something. But either way, it scared the living hell out of me. I've always been the kind of person that likes to take night drives. The roads are less congested and the world seems to settle into a settling calm, and my thoughts drift freely as I navigate the dark, quiet streets. I have one drive, however, that changed a lot of things for me, one that sort of ruined things for me and made me realize how close to death my simple little drive got me. It was about 2 a.m. and I was returning home from a friend's house. The drive was a smooth one. I knew it like the back of my hand. I was just drifting along with my headlights piercing the darkness, the radio playing softly in the background as I kept on down this seemingly endless road flanked by dense woods on either side. As I was breathing in the cool night air as it blasted in my face through the window, I noticed a car stopped on the side of the road with its hazards flashing. I kind of paused mentally for a moment thinking, should I stop? It was really late and I was alone, but the idea of leaving someone stranded in the middle of the road like that just didn't sit right with me. I decided to stop just ahead of the car, a safe distance away from the stranded vehicle. A man stepped out of the car and I noticed that he was limping slightly, but a look of relief spread across his face as he approached my window, so I assumed that he did need my help. He looked a bit disheveled and he was wearing a dirty shirt and some old-looking sweatpants. Nothing about him was screaming red flag. He just looked like he chose to dress lazily that day, or maybe he just didn't have a lot of money. Hey, thank you so much for stopping. My car, it broke down. His voice trembled a bit from what I assumed was the cold. Is there any way that I could ask you to give me a ride to the nearest gas station? I hesitated a bit, torn between wanting to help this guy and that nagging feeling that something was a bit off. I could call a tow truck for you. I figured that I should at least offer that to see if that would be enough. The guy sighed and looked around for a moment and then shivered. I appreciate that, but that would take too long. It's seriously freezing out here. Please, just a quick ride? This is where I started to feel a bit guilty. It was pretty cold and he was definitely not dressed for the weather. I hesitated, but then decided that it was a quick ride down the road, so I let that part of me that wanted to help out win. He got in, thanking me profusely and then directing me to a gas station a few miles down the road. After he gave me the directions, he just sat there silently staring out the window. I glanced at him occasionally, noticing that he was clenching his hands, sweating quite a bit, and just looking a bit unsettled. This kind of bothered me since he said that it was too cold outside, but now he's sweating? A bit strange, but I just figured that I would get him to the gas station and it would be over. We finally arrived at the gas station and he thanked me and got out of the car. His voice was still a bit shaky. He then shut the door, and as he was walking away, I noticed something on the floor of the car. I was about to roll down the window and call out to the guy to tell him that he dropped something. But when I clicked on the cab light, I noticed what it was on the floor. It was a knife, a small kitchen knife, smeared with blood. After a second or two it clicked. He was holding this knife in his pant leg. That's why he was limping. It had fallen out during the trip, and I guessed that he just didn't notice that it wasn't there anymore because he was walking towards the gas station. I immediately grabbed my phone and I called 911, telling them that I just gave a ride to a guy that I think may have stabbed someone. I had to explain the whole situation, and as I was doing so, I thought about the car. I realized that he was in the seat, but I didn't see him driving. I just saw him get out, and he didn't want me to call a tow truck, which made me think that his victim could have been in the car. Well, to wrap this up, I drove back in the direction of the car with 911 still on the phone, informing them where I was going, and I told them that I would wait for the officers. I had to give them all the information that I could, what the guy looked like, what he was wearing, everything that he had said. And I will also note that there was no one in the car, so I was wrong on that thought. They took the knife and they took the car, and I was questioned a lot about the whole thing. After a while, I think they were satisfied that I wasn't involved, but they told me that they would call me if they had any further questions. I have literally no idea if they ever caught the guy. I did get called in again for some more questions, but the questions seemed really vague, like they didn't know where to take the investigation. I do hope that they caught him eventually, and I hope that they found whoever it was that he had stabbed. And to this day, I cannot shake the visual of that man as he got out of my car. I will remember his face for probably the rest of my life. And with all this said, I hope that he and I never meet again. Okay, so this just happened to me and my buddy over the weekend, and I wanted to share this here. I am a 22-year-old man, and I have been living with my grandma since I was about 11. And now that I'm a bit older, I have been able to take care of her as her health has taken a downward slope. However, she is still able to get around on her own at home and is still fully there mentally. So sometimes I go out with some friends for the night just to kick it. Sometimes there are recreationals involved, but we stay out of trouble. I couldn't imagine doing something to disappoint the woman that has raised me. So, anyways, this was one of those nights where Curtis and I met up at our local spot to enjoy a night of no responsibilities and no one depending on us to do something. Our go-to spot was behind a building that had been abandoned some time ago. There was a narrow alleyway that connected it to some kind of doctor's or dental office, but it closed at normal hours, so there wasn't another person in sight. We would sit back there to smoke and bullshit for hours before we finally would leave. That night, we got on the topic of food, and as it goes, we started craving some of our favorite junk food. We made our way out through the alley and to the nearest gas station, and once we were satisfied with our purchase, we went back to our spot. Walking through that alley was normal for us. We walked to that spot from his place since it was close, and that way, a parked car at an abandoned or closed building wouldn't alarm anyone. Being in that alley in the dark didn't really scare us, especially when we weren't alone. It may not have been the best place in town, but we knew how to take care of ourselves. Not to mention, it was an unwritten rule that if you kept to yourself and you mind your own business, no one would bother you or say anything to you. So, when we were walking through the alley and we saw a lanky and scruffy-looking old man, we didn't think anything of it, and we kept our conversation low and did not make eye contact. But as we passed the guy, he let out the low, "Hey!" So, we slowed our pace, but we kept walking and looked back at the guy. He held up his hand as if he was greeting us and asked if we had any smokes. I've been there before, so I stopped and pulled out one to give to him. He then lit it with a matchbook he had, thanking me, and as we nodded, we continued on. A pretty simple reaction that we thought nothing else of. We then got back to our spot and started talking and screwing off again, when we saw that same guy walking out of the alley and towards us. We weren't going to really be able to hide what we were doing, or rather smoking, so we just sat there, waiting to see how this would play out. The man approached and asked if we had any extra that he could smoke too. If it kept the guy from snitching on us, I was happy to share, so I gave him some and he was actually pretty cool. He asked us some general and not too personal questions, like if we hung out there a lot and how we found this place. He even told us some interesting stories that he knew about the building we were behind. He seemed totally fine while we were talking. But then, he dropped his head like he was in deep thought. We sat in silence for a minute before Curtis and I started talking to each other again. Going on like there wasn't a third person sitting there with us. Everyone has their own things that they are trying to work out, so I felt it best to let him sit there and not interrupt him. But as we are talking, he started muttering to himself, but there was nothing we could make out. After this continued for a bit, the guy slowly looked up and was staring right at me. Thinking he may have just had something he wanted to say, I looked back at him and just said, "What's up, boss?" "You shouldn't be here." I was confused at first, partially annoyed, thinking we were about to get some dumb lecture from some random guy about wasting our lives. But then it turned to confusion when I started thinking about how he's been sitting here with us the whole time too. What exactly was his whole plan here then? Curtis and I looked at each other and he asked the man, "What do you mean?" "This is a dangerous place. You never know what you might encounter." Still feeling annoyed and confused, I made a comment about him being here too or something to that effect. That's when, without breaking eye contact, he smiled at me and said, "I know. I've seen bad things happen here. I know things that you couldn't possibly understand." Curtis started talking about how he was killing the mood, and I agreed with him. This was supposed to be our time away from everything else, and now we got this stranger in our self-claimed spot talking about things that made no sense. We made a motion to each other to just get up and leave when the guy once spoke again. "I know things about you, Isiah. Things that you don't even understand about yourself." Now, when we're out doing what we were that night, we rarely actually use each other's full name. It was either us calling each other C or I, or one of the nicknames that we'd given each other. And I can guarantee you that night that we never said our names around that guy. So, how did he know my name? I stood up and I asked him how he knew me again. And without as much as a flinch, the guy looked up at me smiling and said, "It's easy when you have my eyes. Would you like to see into them too?" I hadn't noticed before, as I had no reason to pay much attention to what he looked like. But as I stood over him and the single light from above us lit up his face, I noticed his left eye was glossed over and still, unlike his right eye. It was a fake eye. Call me a jerk, but normally that stuff I wouldn't even notice or care about. But between his cryptic talking, knowing my name, and the night now feeling tense, I was pretty unnerved by this. Curtis looked at me and basically just motioned that we should go, and I agreed. And as we started walking away, he continued to sit in the same spot, not looking at us, and then said, "The night will always find you." We picked up our pace and got the hell out of there. We went back to Curtis's house to try and shake off the bad vibes, our high already ruined. And shortly after, I just went home and to bed, hoping that that guy was just off and that I would never see him again. Everything was fine the next day, and even for most of the week, until I was walking home from the gas station. It felt like I was being stared at, and typically, I just got this annoyed feeling. You know that kind when you want to look at someone and you want to say, "You got a problem?" But this time, I was feeling more on edge. My fight or flight was kicking in, and I started looking around all over. That's when I saw him, on the other side of the street, standing next to a bus stop. It was the same man. I stopped walking, and I just stared at him, as he was clearly already staring at me. I didn't do anything, but stood still until he lifted his arm to wave at me, smiling. I just picked up my pace to get home quickly, and thankfully he didn't follow. I told Curtis about it, so we've been avoiding our normal spot, not wanting to run into him again. So far, neither of us have seen him, but I don't want to take any chances. I don't know if this guy had bad intentions, if he was just trying to scare us, or maybe he was crazy. But whatever it was, I did not like the vibes that I got from that man. I'll update you if I do run into him again, but to be honest, I hope I won't have to. A bunch of years ago, I matched with a guy on Tinder. I was a freshman in college, and I just got out of a relationship and was having fun. I matched with this guy, male and 24, and we can call him D. He was a little odd, but we had similar interests and we went to the same school, so I thought, why not? Well, the red flags started rolling in immediately when I said I would go on a date with him. Of course, the fact that he was much older isn't lost on me as an initial red flag. At this time, I didn't have a car, so D offers to pick me up. But then he tells me that he is not in town, but that he would leave his grandmother's funeral early, which was at a minimum 5 hours away, to just come and pick me up. He showed up in sweatpants, a wife beater, and flip-flops, which struck me odd because he said he was coming from a funeral. We hadn't made plans just to get a bite to eat and hang out. Since he had been out of town, he asked if it was okay if we stopped to pick up his dog. He had left his dog with a friend. I like dogs, so I was like, no problem. It's dark and we pull up to an apartment complex, and he leaves me in the car and then comes back with a golden retriever. The dog immediately starts growling at me, which had never happened to me before, so I start feeling a little weird. D doesn't say anything about the dog's temperament. Because we have the dog, he wants to drop him off at his house, so this feels logical to me, so I just agree. When we pull up to D's house, he asks if I want to come in, and not wanting to sit in the car, I do. The moment that I walked in, I immediately knew that it was the wrong choice. The house is trashed. There's garbage everywhere, trash bags full along the front entry, bottles and wrappers on the couch, and just general crap everywhere. D lets me know that he has a roommate, but that roommate isn't home. So I assume this is to imply that the mess isn't his. And after brushing the trash off his couch, he asked if I want to sit and play chess. I had expressed that I was interested in learning, and he seemed more than happy to help me learn. This, too, was a mistake. D begins to explain the game to me, and it isn't fun first date explaining. He has gotten very serious and is showing me each piece while telling me what it is, what it does, and how it moves. D then begins questioning me over each piece, which most I get wrong, and every time that I get one wrong, he yells at me the correct answer and then tells me to try again. He got more and more frustrated, and it made me very uncomfortable, so I suggested that we pause chess and do something else. Dee suggested watching a movie, which is fine with me. The idea of us leaving and going to get food seemingly forgotten. Dee tells me that we can watch a movie in his room and I oblige. But then he explains that he has to put clean sheets on the bed. I had assumed we were moving to his bedroom because it may have been cleaner. But when we go in, it's not, and there is no TV in his room. He proceeds to put Iron Man 2 on his phone to have us watch. We watch for about 10 minutes of it before things got sexual. I won't tell you strangers the details, but short story short, we didn't have sex, but other things went down. I will say those things were consensual. After they occurred, I was feeling really off about the whole situation, so I told him that I didn't want to have sex. D was confused, but he didn't push it at first. He said fine, and we watched maybe 5 more minutes of the movie before he said he didn't want to watch the movie and more. He started complaining and asking me why I didn't want to have sex with him, and I simply said that I wasn't in the mood anymore. He then began pressuring me to tell him exactly what it was about him that made me feel that way. At this point, we had moved from the bedroom back into the dirty living room. You might be thinking, seems like a perfect time to leave. And I thought so too. But this is where things start to get scary. As if he knows that I'm thinking about how I'm leaving, he explodes and begins to scream at me. This is a 6-foot-something man screaming in the face of a 5-foot-nothing young girl. Of course, I'm internally freaking out, but I'm trying to make sure that I don't piss him off anymore, but also not agreeing to anything. For the next 5 to 10 minutes, Dee screams at me about why I don't like him, why I don't want him, and continuously asks what's wrong with him and to tell him. I tried to placate him as best as possible, saying the old, It's not you, it's me. And, No, I don't want to leave. Again, this man is my only ride home, and I'm truthfully not sure exactly where I was. Though, I did have my phone and Google Maps, but I did not have Uber at that time. D finally calms down when he believes I'm going to stay, and then he suggests that we try playing some video game. I was in full internal freakout mode trying to make sure that I was playing the part of the interested date because I was terrified that if he felt that I wanted to leave, he would freak out again. We play this game for a while, but then out of nowhere, D starts getting upset again. He started yelling about why no one likes him, why no one wants to get to know him, and why no one loves him, saying that he has never had a girlfriend and all of his dates had been one-night stands. Again, I placate him with I don't know. Lots of girls are just snooty like that. At this point, I'm saying anything and everything he wants to hear. He even starts crying about how his mother never loved him and telling me very deep dark things about what his mother has said to him and treated him. After he finally calms down once more, he then gets up and goes to the kitchen to fix us some drinks. Now, if you're anyone with a brain, you're thinking absolutely not, which was my exact thought at that moment. I declined his multiple offers for a drink. He asked if instead of alcohol, I wanted water. And of course, I declined that too, feigning that I wasn't thirsty at all. I stayed at his apartment until about 1 a.m. because I was sitting next to him, terrified to 1. Ask him to take me home, 2. Say that I would walk home, and 3. Figure out how to get an Uber. I had been trying to download Uber on my phone without him noticing, but then it asked for a card information, and that was too hard to do without him noticing. So around 1 a.m., I yawn very loudly and I say, Oh wow, it's 1 a.m. My roommate's going to be so worried about me. I laugh, as if my roommate would be stupid to worry, and that I hadn't been watching the clock since he picked me up at 9 p.m., then said, I'm so tired. I should get home soon. Again, I was super scared that he would freak out, but he didn't explode. He just looked at the clock and said that it's late. But I was not taking any chances, so I said, Oh, I have a great idea. If I get to bed soon, I'd love to have breakfast with you on campus. I was hoping my offer convinced him that I was intending to see him again, and it did. He seemed very happy at the prospect of it and jumped up, walking me out of the house and to his car. The drive back was excruciatingly long. The ride was completely silent and neither of us spoke. It was only a 10-minute drive, but I could have sworn he slowed down every time we got to a particularly dark area or the underpass. Dee dropped me off and I smiled and made a good show of being tired yet excited to see him tomorrow. He offered multiple times to walk me to my door, but I declined every time, and I said that I didn't want to bother him and that I would see him tomorrow. I walked myself to the building, and the moment that I got around the corner, I sprinted so fast up the stairs and to my door before he could change his mind and follow me to my door. When I got in my dorm room, I genuinely felt like I had just escaped a serial killer. Even now writing it makes my heart race a bit. I never met up with him, but he begged me for multiple days after to meet up with him again. He even asked to pay me $20 an hour to sit near me in the library. I declined, obviously, and I only ever saw him once after at the gym on the campus. He didn't see me, and I just left immediately. I've thought about Dee occasionally since the date, and I wondered if all those girls he had one-night stands with had the same experience as I did. I still sometimes wonder how many girls there were after me. So Dee, let's not meet again. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.